It's just a roll, right? I don't know. It's a roll. It's a roll. We're rolling. This is how we communicate climate change, y'all. We are marching. This is from the IPCC front page. We are marching into communities and asking them to make life decisions with this. In many communities in my town in Louisiana, we're marching in with maps colored in red and asking them to make decisions like that. But that's not how the human brain works. I think... okay, sorry, give me a second. The human brain works like this. We are making decisions accessing both halves of the brain, the logic linear data side, as well as the anecdotal and emotional and memory side. And both halves of the brain are activated when we're making decisions. Neuroscientists are studying this. And yet so we're losing all the opportunities to access the lived daily life experiences of climate change in order to make better decisions. And when you think about it, sorry guys, there we go. And when you think about it, this is a very ancient thing to do, to mix data and story. Right, this is the Madrid Codex. I was actually going to be a researcher. I was on an academic track in college. I spent 2 years of my life studying this manuscript that documents planting cycles and rain cycles and has astronomical tables that are more accurate than Kepler's. And they did it by pairing that data with stories to understand how history and social upheaval and violence related to their everyday weather experiences. And we've lost that. I think I can do this. Come on, guys. Yeah. I've traveled all around the world. I spent 15 years as a global science climate change reporter. I covered Hurricane Katrina and the Asian tsunami the same year. And over and over again, you see the same mistakes being made, which is that traditional data models, the things that are used by engineers and scientists and city planners and insurers, fail to be specific enough and granular enough to inform adaptation decisions at a block-by-block level. When we miss community voice and we miss community context, we miss opportunities to get it right, to make the solutions more targeted, more effective, more efficient, but most importantly, more trusted. So ISeeChange begins with individuals like Destiny Bell in New Orleans and grows into communities co-investigating their environment together and co-informing solutions with their local leaders. There we go. So this is what happens when you get everybody together to make a flood map, to understand a 2-year storm event, which is really, really difficult to model. We've made data maps that are more accurate than hypothetical data models in multi-million-dollar HUD-funded infrastructure projects. And we do that with just combining the very simple act of a story. What are you seeing change? What's your photo? What's your question? Along with hyper-specific data. How much rainfall did you get? How high was the flooding? By combining the qualitative and the quantitative, we can actually produce really, really essential and crucial information. So not only was this place flooding first and draining last, but people couldn't have their kids play in their yard. Buses stopped working. Trash stopped getting picked up. And there was so much pollution that people didn't feel safe. The information from the flood models did not highlight this place as worth including in the green infrastructure projects for the neighborhood until the city and the engineers saw the ISeeChange data and they started modeling and including it as best they could. It's not just about the data, it's about how we respond to stress. So we're kind of collecting information about how people are adapting to this over time and working with their neighbors. This is a classic, put a sticker on a map where the flooding exercise is, and it is typical of a public meeting. Y'all can be here today at 4 o'clock, and I am so grateful you're with me. But most people who are impacted by weather and climate don't have time to come to lectures. They don't have time to go to workshops. They don't have time to sit with you on a Saturday afternoon. They got jobs, they got kids, they got real lives. So this is what our engineering partners in Gentilly were able to gather from people coming in to a workshop. And this was our database. We were able to quadruple the amount of data typically collected in engagement efforts. Public engagement efforts. And not only that, when the engineers were curious about what was going on in the model, we were able to show them pictures like this. This is backflow. The engineers were able to use this as evidence to focus their efforts in different areas of the project. Across two projects, we've contributed up to 4 design decisions that have saved up to $600,000 in redesign fees. This is another example where the model is not picking up flooding that is happening further east and further south. And this is a person who didn't come to a meeting. This is a person telling us about flooding that is really, really concerning to them. And we went from being a nice to have, kind of feel good, like, oh, let the community have its voice, to being an essential service because we could prove that the data that the community was providing in real time and the historical data for real events mattered for their designs. We expanded ISeeChange citywide with this Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. We fled a lot lately. We've been having recurring 100-year storm events in spaces of 4 to 8 weeks. And it's starting to be a conversation of not just where is the infrastructure solution, but is it safe to drive in the summer? That's a 2-year storm event. That means a 50% chance of happening in a given year. It's not just, when you understand your risk, you can actually have impact. It's not just, it's dangerous, but understanding what kinds of conditions cause what kinds of problems can actually lower community insurance rates. So we're working with the city on that. But more importantly, we're trying to help people understand what the limits are of infrastructure. We spent $700 million on a major infrastructure project. It was designed for a 10-year storm event, but we're getting these 100-year storm events, right? So how do we design social solutions, not just engineering ones? We don't do just flooding. We are trying to reinvent climate communication, period. When people see things on ISeeChange, we send out text messages asking other people if they saw it too, trying to amplify the signal and create connection. These are students using ISeeChange in Florida. We're actually one of the more popular citizen science apps. We don't call ourselves that. We just call this being a 21st century citizen. And it is truly powerful when you start to get intergenerational knowledge creation. Where we're working across 7 communities who are dealing with both sea level rise and rainfall and the combined effects of both. This is Hampton, New Hampshire. We have a very active community in Ocean City, New Jersey. And we're launching in Miami this year. We're really excited about that work to do flooding and heat and equity work. So why ISeeChange versus like a Twitter or Facebook? Climate communication is nuanced. We have been struggling with it from day one. So why would we think that using a traditional social media platform is the appropriate place to have these dialogues? They can be pretty toxic. And we have found that our community is actually quite positive and impact-oriented. I put this in a couple slides that might be relevant to Atlanteans. I know y'all are a city in the forest, but the systems in which our trees are thriving are changing. And this is a person who flagged trees that she never saw falling down before after living in a neighborhood for many decades. This is a triple threat. When you have dried trees dealing with Santa Ana winds and an urban interface, that is a very dangerous situation. A month later, LA had one of its biggest fires on record. It's not just about emergency preparedness, it's also about the cumulative experience. As our environment changes, there is trauma associated with that, and our users tell us that they feel better over time, sharing their stories, organizing the chaos, making it feel manageable and actionable. And so we're really zeroing in on how the platform can be of service in that space with eco-stress. I want to kind of touch briefly on a project that we've been working on with Georgia Tech since we are here. It's pretty hot sometimes in Atlanta. I thought it was bad in New Orleans, but we're not anywhere close. We're on the bottom compared to y'all with the urban heat. Urban heat is really dangerous, and we don't talk about it enough. If you think about heat at the level of the body, the way climate change is affecting the earth, every single one of your systems is impacted by heat. Your circulation, your breathing. Certain medications don't work at certain temperatures. If you're predisposed to any kind of medical condition during a heat wave, you're at risk. It's really hard to track because, especially in the South, we think we have to be resilient to heat. Like, it's kind of like well, this is what it's like, and we all assume we have ACs. But there is definitely segments of our population that are feeling the heat in ways that are very dangerous. We also understand that urban heat aligns with redlining and historical environmental racism. I do like to point out that the environment itself is not inherently racist, but the structures that we build around it are. And what we do see is the compounding of health impacts in these neighborhoods alongside urban heat. That particular neighborhood right there is the place that Destiny lives and where we have an active project. And it's not just communities of color, it's anybody who is a low-income resident. She works now at in a kitchen, and the conditions in those kitchens are pretty terrible. So we'd just like to kind of point that out as we kind of talk about race and equity in this conversation. It's a very nuanced about how people are being impacted where. We did a pilot in Harlem in 2016, working with a local community group called We Act for Environmental Justice and a local radio station. We put sensors inside people's apartments to measure and model indoor urban heat, and we sync those sensors with stories that we were hearing from the community. That blue line is Miss Jones's sensor. You'll note she's not a digital native. She's 80, but she takes care of her 3-month-old grandson. Those are the two demographics we care most about on ISeeChange, so we're not a traditional tech company in that regard. Our goal is to reach people where they are. So we deploy neighbors and residents and people who know her to tell us her story on her behalf. She had one of the hottest sensors in our sample. We also put those sensors in public housing. You don't know this, but there's no federal right to cool. I didn't put that slide in. There's no federal right to cool. You have a right to get a heater from your landlord, but not an AC. And so as we start to go into the hotter and hotter communities facing greater risk, we have to have these conversations. Those sensors are on the left at night. I'm sorry I didn't have an extra slide about the full graph because this is Georgia Tech and you want to see the full graph, but I'll explain it to you. The yellow line is outside temperatures. At night, it dips down behind this red line. That's where we need to feel, that's where our bodies need to come to rest at night. And you'll see if you slept in a hammock outside in Harlem, you'd be fine. But those buildings were trapping heat all night. An indoor urban heat wave starts 3 to 4 days before the National Weather Service says there's a problem and can last up to 7 days after they say it's not a problem. It has a very different behavior. So that means we're warning and talking to communities all wrong. We're now working with Georgia Tech on working with sensors. This is actually your campus, I believe. The Urban Climate Lab in Bryan Stone. And you can see how granular the heat map is. And even to break that down, you can have 53 days in the summer on Georgia Tech's campus be unsafe, unhealthy, and maybe a block over have it be 7 days. Right? Again, the model data is not granular enough to know where the impacts are and how. So how does that translate when we work on our communities? Well, we put up these sensors on utility poles. They're not live to the internet. They're live to the internet. They're using low radio frequency waves to transmit data. But we don't want to talk to people in graphs and maps. We want to talk to them in plain language. So we're developing syncs on ISeeChange that will have local data and more bigger picture data sets to be able to tell people about their experiences in real time, just like we all talk to each other and have that knowledge on hand. Dialogue, data can and should be a dialogue. And in fact, dialogue is its own kind of data. This is Destiny's post the first time she came on ISeeChange. And she's just like every New Orleanian. Every time it rains, it floods. You probably have that here in the last couple of days. I heard it was really rainy, right? Every time it rains, it floods. About 8 weeks later, without any real onboarding from us, she's talking like this. like a hydrologist would or an engineer. Again, community risk education can lower community insurance rates. The more informed you are about risk, the more able you are to act. And we can actually measure that. We started working with social scientists to analyze language on across the platform. And without having a control study, we got the highest correlation between usage on ISeeChange and learning. People's language becomes more complicated, more sophisticated, and longer. People are as they pay attention, they notice more things. Again, since when does science, the act of observation and acting questions exclusively belong to one class of people, when we can all work together to improve knowledge? Oh boy. And in that regard, you have to be able to bring the community data that you've been able to generate back to the communities that it impact. We work as best we can, whenever we can, to be able to take everything we learn on ISeeChange and give it back to the community. This is a pop-up block party that we co-hosted with a soul food restaurant owner. And he was so busy that we would actually have to put headphones on him and record him while he was cooking. And we showed him pictures the community had posted. And we asked him what he wanted his community to know about flood risk. And we did it while he was cooking because we didn't want to bother him because he worked real hard. And he selected all the images that he wanted to show his neighbors about flood risk in the community. And we also have done other kinds of engagement. Sorry about that. When we have a neighborhood that we know is not on Twitter, that we know is not reading the newspaper, that it is really hard to work with and access, it's not because they're hard to work with, it's because no one's actually gone to where they are. So we put comment boxes in people's and local businesses who've been incredible partners with us in certain neighborhoods, particularly places that have wait times. And we've actually been able to recruit digitally to the tool using that. We've also seen people have the most amazing conversations on comment box cards. Oh, sorry, I can't seem to remember. How do we do this? There we go. We also have live storytelling events. People in New Orleans who lost their cars in a major flood in 2017 told stories next to the people who lost their jobs as a result of that flood. It was really incredible to see civic and public dialogue taking place in a humane space where people weren't yelling at each other at city council meetings. So here's the math about why we do what we do. I think actually 12 years is probably conservative. But what's, again, when my kid is, what is he all now? When he's 15, he's going to inherit the world that I give him as best I can, so I work really hard for him. But it's this that really we worry about. We are normalizing extreme weather and climate experiences in a window as short as 2 to 8 years. That's the latest social science. So when you do the math, you think about that. It's the equivalent of us being frogs in a boiling pot on the stove. We've talked to people in Ocean City, New Jersey, who just stopped caring about flooding because it's that common. It's been flooding since the 90s, so why should I care? There's a woman, I know y'all have early bees popping up because it's an early spring. There's a woman who's been documenting her bees for 5 years on ISeeChange, and in 2015, she freaked out because they woke up in Colorado in the middle of January. She just posted about it January 14th. She's not worried as much. She should, though, because early springs put you at risk for drought, West Nile virus, and wildfire season. But what we're after is this. If we can see what's changing and point to it, then we can act on it. Destiny didn't care about flooding until she noticed how much it was bothering her and impacting her daily life. And once she had that moment, she wanted to take action. We are trying to create destinies and find them. They're there. People are naturally powerful. We can't say that we are empowering them. That is ridiculous. People are naturally powerful, and when they're connected, they are that much more powerful. We're trying to create a network of destinies, a network of Liams. We have users in 118 countries, and we are seeding an international neighbor-to-neighbor movement that is seeing change together and making them. Thank you.
Wow. So I will definitely be downloading this app and be sharing ISeeChange across my networks, among youth of color, among everyone I know. But I think something really, really important here is the emphasis on storytelling and civil engagement. This is how Indigenous communities historically have told their stories, and this is how we know our way of life now. And I think it's important to circle back to that in times of dire need. And this is now, and it's only going to get worse, so we need to act upon it. With that, I would like to introduce Raina Turner Greenlee. She is a staunch proponent of employing sustainable solutions to human challenges by emulating nature's time-tested patterns and strategies. Raina owns and operates Sustainable Community Solutions, as well as manages a network of 2,000 individuals and organizations dedicated to sustainable development in communities across the African diaspora. Alongside organizing the annual Black Sustainability Summit, Raina serves as a project manager for Habisha Incorporated Urban Green Job Training Program in partnership with the Nature Conservancy's Urban Conservation and Healthy Cities Initiative. Raina's passion for creating healthy and sustainable communities shifted her career focus from advertising these issues to engaging in global research for local solutions, including generational and relational development and increasing community members' self-sufficiency. Ladies and gentlemen, Raina Turner Greenlee.
So let's see if I can get this presentation pulled up. Let's see. And yours. Oh. Nope. You know, technology is great, right? Let's see. How do I, it's hard to see from this angle. I guess I'm gonna just decline. Yeah, I don't want this end user agreement. Okay, I'll accept it since they're gonna force me. It's typically what ends up happening, right? Let's see. All right, we'll just skip it and go somewhere else. You guys get to see me work on the computer. There we go. All right, success. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. I first want to give thanks and honor to the Creator, to my ancestors, those known and unknown. I want to give thanks to Jenny, Chris, Rebecca, Julia, and Zeena, and particularly to Liam's family. Thank you so much. To the point in your presentation around kind of how we start doing this type of work, it definitely was inspired by my father and my mother, of course. Give a shout out to my mom. But at the same time, I think the biggest push that I had was to not continue to stay and move within the same spaces that most people were moving in. And it's not always easy, right? As we talk about Black sustainability, sadly, in 2020, we still have to be here and have this additional piece on top of sustainability because within that space, equity is still not there. And so I'm here with you to stand on the shoulders of those ancestors that have come before me, those that I've studied, those that I've learned, those that I honor and revere. When I speak about myself, when you hear me say I am speaking in first person plural because I cannot be here without the support that I've had. When I started on this journey, and I'm gonna do more of a narrative. I was trying to decide whether I wanted to teach, whether I wanted to talk about myself, or whether I wanted to talk about the initiative. So I'm gonna roll them all into one, all right? Is that fine? I think it'll be a little bit more fun and shake things up. But I went on this journey of going back to fetch knowledge that wasn't given to me. And my dad used to always ask me, you know, where did you get the information from? Have you checked your source? Have you considered your source? And have you tried to look in other places and spaces? As I talked to you guys, you talked about Liam and his, you know, his vibrancy and always willing to be kind of right on those front lines. My biggest piece was exposure. We typically didn't get exposed to a lot of things that our counterparts did. And so I went on this journey, I think the 6th grade it was, I read this book called The Destruction of a Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. And that was it for me. And that was it for my teachers. They had enough of me. I was like, you're trying to indoctrinate me and you just don't know what you're doing. And I I got put out of class quite a bit, but my grades still succeeded. When you go back and fetch that knowledge, it gives you this sense and this purpose and this greater foundation to stand upon. And so as we go back and fetch, this is an Adinkra symbol by the Akan people in Ghana. It's a bird that goes back and fetches wisdom and knowledge that sits on its back. And it's not just to go back and fetch the knowledge and wisdom just to have it. It's to actually then take it and apply it to present day challenges and solutions, right? So you take that knowledge and wisdom and you apply it to whatever challenges come your way. And I found myself really being pushed by a professor. If you guys have pushy professors, if you have folks that continuously challenge you, I always found myself in the classroom with the teacher that nobody wanted. And that was because I wanted to be pushed. And I wanted to be challenged. And it was never fun while I was going through it, but I definitely came out better for it. And I got pushed by one of my professors to actually go to China and travel and serve as one of his assistants in a very rural area, Anshan, in China. And I got to go there and I got to teach, and I definitely didn't feel qualified to be there. But I will tell you, after going and traveling, that's been it for me. I live by the motto of never spending 12 consecutive months on U.S. soil. I always will leave, and I'll spend at least 30 days actually going and looking at different communities, particularly those that have had roughly the least amount of exposure to westernized culture, just to see how have you been able to preserve your culture? How have you been able to actually move forward without having some of the effects and negative impacts that this westernized civilization has imparted on us. And as I did that, I found a lot of things at the core, right? Where there's a different value system. The worldview definitely supports this whole concept of social energy, right? As the value point. It's not about the dollar. It's really about how you can actually utilize the collective genius of the whole. You're not an individual, you're a part of the rest of the system, right? We're all a part of this earth, and that is how we move forward. So when you think about sustainability and you think about high technological advances, my husband actually, I'll give him very much credit for this term that I'm using up here because he sent me an article. We love to exchange information. He sent me this article about high tech. TEK, and it's traditional ecological knowledge. I also like to replace it with traditional environmental knowledge or traditional economic knowledge. There was a high science in these communities that is oftentimes overlooked or either appropriated, right? And credit is not given. And so as I stand here today, I want to talk about the value of having high-tech design, high-tech practices, and us going back and fetching that knowledge and applying it. And that's what we do with the Black Sustainability Summit. That's what we do within our network. And those are the principles that we stand firm on and we are unapologetic about. So as you can see here, this is Timbuktu and Mali. They've built with natural materials, right? Utilize local resources, and it's also using chemicals that are found within your backyard, right? So if a natural disaster, whereas we experience climate changes, things change and ebb and flow, our ancestors built with such a high science and design that even if that were to get decimated, you won't have the leaching of chemicals, you won't have the amount of waste that will happen if you're in an area that might support a little bit more high tech. And there's also been embedded these knowledge systems that I think that we're returning to, right? On a very small scale. We just aren't giving it the credit that it's due. I pulled this one because I got a chance to actually go to Palenque in Colombia as well. And you get a chance to see that there's also this, I like to say it's the first plumbing system that was there, right? And so as you get a chance to travel and you get a chance to experience things outside of what is the dominant worldview, you get a chance to see that these aren't really new concepts. These aren't new aha moments that you have to say, hey, I've got this solution. These are ancient concepts. So when you look at sustainability, green infrastructure, resilience, biomimicry, these are all different ways to describe what was embedded in a people's culture. And if we look to Nana Dr. Marimba Ani, you know that culture is our immune system, right? And if you support yourself and you support your culture, you will continue to produce that which did not have the negative impacts that this current society has had. And so if we're looking toward it, if we're looking toward innovation, we need to look back as well to be informed. I pull this up because as a member of the African diaspora, a lot of our culture was torn from us, taken, stripped, names, language. And the best way that we've been able to find, or at least myself, has also been to go back and look at traditional African spiritual systems, because that was the only way to embed that knowledge and wisdom. And so oftentimes you may get a bad rap or be demonized as, oh, you're worshiping different animal totems and things like that. But you really have to understand that nature or natural law was it. And what was happening was you embedded the laws of nature and the aspects inside of these personified deities, if you will. And so you actually are able to have a people pass this down generationally to say, you know what, let's respect the water, let's respect the air, let's look at these things. And now that that's been broken, you find that the majority of the world's people are also separate from it. So when you ask those questions around climate change and you ask those questions around how can you continue to educate a people, if they've been broken from their culture, which uplifted it and had this, how do you help to get them back or return? And one of the things that has really motivated me has been the educational concepts. Our network is about 2,000 folks, as Zeena shared, 2,000 people around the globe that are focused on sustainable development. And we all have this understanding that although indigenous culture was ostracized, pretty much appropriated, and many leaders are controlling this narrative that doesn't include our voice, we understand that we still have to pick up and keep moving and keep working, and it's not going to be easy. So today I'm just here to bring awareness to the work that we're doing and talk about the impacts that we can continue to have as we look at emerging markets, as things continue to shift, as we look at these sustainable development goals. Oftentimes you see a lot of the green market expansion and development concentrated in developed and emerging economies. Well, Africa is an emerging market. Africa's diaspora is also an emerging market, which oftentimes is overlooked. And we see that here right in our backyard. Has anybody heard the term gentrification? You can raise your hand. I'm sure you've heard it, right? That's displacement, and it's still an emerging market where we see a lot of development happening and occurring. If we have it in emerging markets, we have a chance to get it right. And it shouldn't be done without the people that actually live there. And so as I made this journey, the whole reality that set in is even though there's unprecedented urbanization, we have an opportunity to get this right, but we have to do it in an equitable way. I'll skip through here. I think the biggest piece, and I did want to touch on this because I liked your sensors, Julia. I did. Yeah, we'll talk. Because oftentimes as Black people, African people, we end up being living sensors, right? So we're the canary in the coal mine. And we end up receiving the most of environmental degradation's impacts, and we are the least resilient people in the sense of being able to respond. Now, we're the most resilient when it comes down to taking everything that life throws our way and still coming. But we need to be the people that are also at the table. And so instead of begging or asking for a seat at the table, what I did was look around and find people and ask folks. And the more I started asking and pulling on those people, they started coming together. And this is just a snapshot of the leaders in sustainability that look like me, that look like the communities that we are serving and the communities that experience the most impacts from climate change and environmental pollution. And so it's been a fun journey. I've had a lot of fun working with them. We've hosted workshops online and on land. This year, actually, it's already 2020. This year we will be in Ghana, traveling and contributing to a sustainable community, Habesha's Kazi Development, the Kwaku Ando Sustainability Institute. We will be there and we'll be hosting workshops hands-on. So we'll be working with local Ghanaians as well as bringing people from across the diaspora to actually come there and learn how to actually build with the earth, how to actually install solar. What are some of the impacts and what's the importance? Because as you have a lot of Chinese in there mining and taking out bauxite, you're exposed. As soon as that hits the air, the land it's done. Your water is done. It's toxic. And so the people are there working, trying to make a dollar because of the economic situation without fully understanding the impacts of doing so. And so that's what we do. And we do it from a standpoint that allows culture to be at the base so that we can have those common shared experiences and be able to talk a common language. Here are some of the areas that we focus on in our work. And as the network has continued to grow, one of the major benefits that we've had is to really call and challenge people on the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, and say, you know, we have projects that we want to fund. We have work that we want to do. We are capable, qualified, and excellent at what we've been doing, grassroots to grass tops. Now it's an opportunity for our network to actually be mobilized in the right way to actually contribute to these areas of focus that impact our communities. A few of our solutions have been collaboration, capacity building. We support those who are members of our networks, helping them to scale and also helping them to further fill in some of the gaps that they may have by allowing it to be more of a collective effort. And we have a major database that I'm hoping we get a chance to work with Georgia Tech students to help us make it as dynamic and as robust as this ISeeChange, or maybe even having some levels of collaboration, because we have a lot of data, we've collected a lot of data, but it's now time to put it in a platform that everybody can utilize and see. I wanted to make sure that I shared at least maybe 3 of the folks or organizations that follow and adhere to these standards and these concepts and these principles of embedding African culture and embedding African spirituality and honoring the culture of the communities in which they are operating. CDPI is one. My sister Madele is here. And what they've done here in this Ifa house down here is they have an indoor courtyard. And in traditional African communities, which you don't find so widely anymore because everybody's rushing toward this westernized view, and this is now the status. This is the place that you want to get to. That's not the place that honors your culture. And when that's gone, when your physical spaces are gone, you lose quite a bit. And so when you return to pouring libations inside of your home, when you return to communing with your ancestors who were there, you've now invited the environment to be back inside of your home and elevated that. This is a way in which you can also make a dent and a difference. And it doesn't have to be in a way that's considered quote unquote primitive, which is not negative, but it can still be done as beautifully as they've been able to design it. I mentioned Habesha Incorporated. It is a Pan-African organization based here in Atlanta. I do work with them as well. Traditionally, it's about 18 years of work that they've been focusing on urban agriculture and training up the community on actually having a better healing experience with the land. So if you don't know how we got here, it wasn't a happy journey. And I don't say that in jest. I say it because it's oftentimes swept under the rug. And as we talk about the transatlantic enslavement trade and all of the things that were broken from 170 million people, this is an African Holocaust. This is an African Holocaust. And it occurred and it happened. And if we want to rebuild our relationship with the land and return to actually growing our food and learning how we can survive, this is one of the hurdles that we have to get over. And this is one of the beautiful things that this organization that I'm proud to partner with and proud to do work with has been doing. And now has taken that work after 18 years to Ghana to actually build a bridge to show what the parallels are, because just as ignorant as many of us are here about what goes on overseas, they are as well. And so it's up to us to actually bridge that gap. And so I'm happy to be taking that journey with them in 2020 in October for our Black Sustainability Summit. Last but not least, we have an environmental engineering firm that does work in Rwanda, in Ghana, and here in the United States. And I just wanted to share with you all just a few organizations that we work with that are part of our network that are doing phenomenal work that is to a standard that is excellent. And oftentimes it's unsung, and oftentimes it's not, you're not aware of it. And so I thought it'd be nice to share that with you all today. So I leave you in these words, Luta continua lasima tushinde imbashaka. And that just means, you know, the struggle will continue and we will prevail without a doubt. So thank you very much.
I don't even know what to say after that, honestly. I really feel like this hit home for me because, you know, as a member of the African diaspora, as a woman who is fighting for social justice, who is fighting for environmental justice, this brings us back to our roots. A lot of the work that I do in 0 Hour is educating the public and mobilizing on what are the roots of climate change, we actually have a presentation called Getting to the Roots of Climate Change. And this consists of colonialism, capitalism, and all of this is due to the exploitation of indigenous communities and African communities and Black communities. So I think it's very powerful of you to bring that here, especially to a predominantly white institute. I think that it's the goal here is for you all to take your privilege, to take your wisdom, and spread that across your communities. Make your impacts that you can. So thank you, Raina. So right now we're going to transition over to we're going to transition over to a panel discussion. So let's go. Okay, so I have some prepared questions, and both of these questions are directed at both of you, so please feel free to answer at both of your will at any point. So the first question is, the work you do connects people experiencing and responding to climate change through networks. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts and insights on the power of these networks and how they can be leveraged to promote these changes that you both are planning and striding to see.
Sure. It's interesting, when we were building ISeeChange, I didn't think I really appreciated power. I was really wanting just to understand knowledge that was inherent to anyone who's lived in any place for a long time, about how that place has experienced change, how they've seen it, and how it's impacting them, and connecting that knowledge and that insight to a power structure. Maybe that's where I would have thought about it. Most of our decision making is still top down, and it becomes that much more crucial when we are kind of making decisions about how to adapt to climate change. We are going to have finite resources to make decisions and about where to put solutions, how to make them most effective, and the math behind that is not equitable. So being able to highlight community impact and stories to be able to, and match that to data as an act of collective voice, as an act of bottom-up decision making. But it didn't start that way. I think what I really love about ISeeChange and its inherent natural power, I don't want to say that we are empowering, again, it's really not what I designed it for, was just recognizing natural power where it was. And I think I'm just reflecting on a conversation that I had on horrible social media platforms like Twitter recently, where people are talking about, people who are in power are saying, well, I've got, and this is Georgia Tech, so I'm going to go there if that's okay. Someone who has spent a great deal of time and effort on expertise and developing really incredible data, was reflecting, that I've spent all this, I've generated all this expertise, I've got all this knowledge, we've got all this knowledge, yet someone will come up to me with a spreadsheet and a clipboard and try and challenge me. And I kind of, that is just, it breaks my heart. Because if someone spent the time creating a spreadsheet and a clipboard and wanted to engage you on it, then they're wanting to share in knowledge creation. And if we could just honor that as awesome, perhaps it's about climate denial. Maybe it's because they don't agree with your worldview. But to acknowledge that moment can be awesome, and that we need to respect people from where they come from, and the knowledge that they're trying you to get to shout out at you, and create a forum or a format where that could coexist with our other traditional forms of knowledge and data collection, then that is where I think real power can happen. It's a mediating exercise in some respects. But clearly, when we know that the people who we need to hear from the most are least representative, that's also an inherent correction, if you will, to the power dynamic. I think just reflecting on James Carville is from Louisiana, so I always watch what he's saying, and y'all might have seen him on CNN going off. He said something like, we can't look down on people and win the Senate. This is about power, people. Now, I'm not a politician. I don't have a specific political party or whatever. But that is important. We cannot look down on people. We have to really recognize that there is value in everybody's experience and find ways to meet them where they are.
Taking questions, or I see an arm come up pretty quickly. Well, we can continue, or we can get back to it. I just don't know. How do you want to do it?
I just wanted to also mention that one time, I'm a fourth year resident here in Asian Tech, and I just wanted to add that by saying that one time my brother-in-law, he asked me what seems to some people like a dumb question. He said, well, because I was talking about like carbon emissions and how it's an issue. He said, if it's so hot, like why is carbon a matter of importance? Like he didn't see the connect. And then like my sister actually, who's white, was like, on like why would you challenge her or something like that? And I was like, no, like I love questions, like I love being asked things, like please engage with me as much as possible. Like I really am passionate for what I do, so this is really exciting. So I guess it's just like to add on to that discussion of like engaging with people and respecting like where people started and their confusion and being excited about what we do and sharing it with everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. I know sometimes I have burning questions I like to get out, so I don't know if that's the format to answer those questions, but I'm like, I feel it. I think I remember the question around the network, right? For me, I feel like the network that we have, initially, I didn't do any promotion or anything like that. It was just SEO. I guess it was really good SEO from my days in marketing and PR and web design, a previous life, where people were able to search and find, I'm interested in Black sustainability. That's all that I had as a, keyword. And then I started getting people through the registration to kind of share, this is what I want, this is what I need, here are the problems in my community. Hey, can you solve it? Can you find me somebody that can help me, grow more food? Or can you help me figure out how to mitigate this water? And so ended up just starting connecting people, and now have way too many requests and desires and questions for support that I can't even manage myself. And so I think when we talk about the power of a network, this one was pretty organically created. And the solutions are already being offered up from the people that are members of the network. So it's not even, okay, now how can we help you? It's, I see the clear problem, here's the challenge, or here's the work that I'm doing, and here's the population that I want to serve and I want to meet. And so it's really my role to just amplify their voices and to find the connections that they need. And for those that have access to resources, financial resources or other resources, to connect them with those so that we can continue to make sure that our network is viable and is still able to live. And even if we can't serve them, this is our 5th year doing it, hosting the summit and staying in touch with them, they still come back every single year, and they come back in greater numbers, and it's in more and more countries where we're finding our members actually coming and saying, hey, I want to get some type of support from you guys.
That is a great segue into my most burning question. Again, for the both of you, I'm wondering, how do the Black Sustainability Summit and ISeeChange engage with people who are typically not engaged into the climate space, and how can it be more accessible to these communities, LGBTQ, POC, Black communities, Indigenous communities, disabled communities, all of the communities that are underrepresented. These people shouldn't just be involved, they should be leading, they should be on the forefront of this discussion. And I'm wondering, how do your networks and communities not only welcome, but reach out to these people? And how can you get them involved in your communities? And how can you get them leading the discussion, fighting the fight?
I can go. I just felt like I talked, but I feel like we are inclusive. And the first 2 years, we were online only, which of course, those are their barriers. I know there are barriers in my community, and if you catch me on the wrong month, it might be a barrier for me. And I think that the biggest benefit that we've had was to do it in person. We heard it from folks to say, hey, I want to meet. I need to physically go to a space. You're not going to get people in the middle of the day or during normal work hours, and you might not get them in the evening, right? But it's important to also speak that language and to leverage the people who are already doing that work, right? Oftentimes people come in and you want to recreate this model or something hasn't been there. Have you asked around to see if there are other people that are doing that work? And so that's what ended up happening. More and more people started saying, hey, there's an organization here that does this. There's another organization that does that, and allowing them to move forward in their lane and hold that lane and amplify their voices. That's all I'm doing here today. Is I'm not saying I've solved every single one of the challenges, but have been able to identify and honor the rest of the members of our network and their networks to reach out to those to make sure that they're included. And so I feel like we do a fairly good job. We can always do better for inclusion and making sure that we reach out to folks. But largely it's been to invite people into that space and then to actually have them say, who else is doing work around here and how can we amplify that? And then invite them to actually speak and host workshops. So there are no barriers as far as education goes. There's not a standard to say if you're, you have to be a professor or you have to actually have been doing this work. We have 3 different levels where you can come in as an enthusiast. I'm just excited. I've had some young people just come in and present that are in high school. They've presented at the summit to this audience and they've done a phenomenal job. All the way up to our elders who also, technologically challenged as they have been in the past, have also presented. And so we do a good job to have that balance. But if there's ever any way that we can do a better job, please pull my coattail. Let me know.
Very much so. Yeah, I don't think anybody does it perfectly, to be honest. I haven't seen anyone do it perfectly. And I don't believe in any kind of perfect execution anyway. We're always improving. But we are digital tools, so that also kind of presents its own challenges in terms of getting out to the communities that we really, really need to hear from the most. So in 2017, we really took a pause moment and said, okay, we've been really pushing hard on the digital technology and the platform. What does ISeeChange look like when we're not a digital technology? So we got an art residency. I'm not an artist, or at least I never thought of myself as one. But then again, I'm not a scientist either, but I just do all the science conferences. So since when is science and art kind of, inaccessible spaces? Like, great innovation comes from understanding different disciplines. So my partner and I spent a little time kind of incubating more creative analog techniques. Some of them I showed you, actually, in the slideshow. We put comment boxes out in places where we knew we weren't hearing from and that nobody was hearing from because they're not on Twitter and they're not reading the paper or engaging online or whatever. We did these pop-up block parties. We did the storytelling events. We haven't been able to get enough, to be able to do that at scale with every community that we work with. But right now we're in a transition point where we're really, really thinking about scaling and what does that mean? And a big part of that is not just the individual acting on ISeeChange and networking digitally, but then taking that knowledge and representing it back to their own communities. I can't be in 118 countries and I would die. But I don't want to be. I want everybody who learns on the tool to be able to turn back around to their community themselves and share that knowledge. So when we do with our elders who have some of the most incredible knowledge, we know that messing around on a phone is not what they want to be doing. And so we really are encouraging kind of the younger members of the neighborhoods that we work with, some of the students, to share their story on their behalf. And then there's an intergenerational transfer of knowledge with the young folks listening to how their neighborhood has changed over time and representing the voices of those kind of the elderly folks that we need to be taking care of during major environmental and weather crises. So that's how we've handled it in the past. I do think that we get into some really thorny areas when it comes to representation. It's tough. As much as we want everyone at the table in equity and diversity, the people who show up at the table may be representing a community, but that is a really, really weird thing. Does anyone feel like you represent everyone in your neighborhood? Or everyone in your racial class or gender? Representation is tough. And so I think that we talk about these things in labels, but when you actually walk them through, we're not being careful or thoughtful about it. Because the person who shows up and says, I represent this neighborhood in this color, when you go and ask them to like, okay, cool, let's get your neighborhood to post. Like, let's get together. Let's do an event. Let's have a conversation. Like, there's a breakdown sometimes. And because it's, go to a neighborhood association. Who goes to a neighborhood association meeting? Anyone? One person in this room goes to a neighborhood association? I think it's a couple, right? Okay, and like understanding what neighborhood representation means and how thorny that is, and understanding that we're trying to do that at every level of the human landscape. I just think it is so important, but we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about what we mean when we say that, equity inclusion.
So I just want to clarify to the audience mainly that the reason this discussion is primarily social justice oriented is because social justice and environmental justice are their one mission. You cannot have social justice without having environmental justice, and that's simply due to the fact that oftentimes it's minority communities, underrepresented communities, low-income communities that are on the forefront of disaster, similar to what you were talking about. Oftentimes it's Black communities, people of color, low-income minority communities who are facing the most intense effects. We are the test trials, and that's not fair, that's not right. We see that with Flint, Michigan right now. That's not, random. These are the effects of the climate crisis taking place in lead poisoning in water. Nothing is happening. That's environmental racism. Which leads me to my next question. So what do the terms environmental racism, environmental justice, and climate justice mean to you two? And where do you see this movement headed?
Well, I also would be a little remiss if I didn't notice Dr. Nataki Osborne jokes here. Yes, 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 I'm going to pull you out there. Yes, yes, yes. Who has definitely been a major anchor in this work. Again, I stand here, or I sit here actually, to talk about what that means for me. It's a reality in our community. It's not something that is going to change overnight. And it's a sad reality as well. But as we are being very positive and looking toward solutions, being solution oriented, I think when we talk about environmental racism and environmental justice, we have to be clear, to your point, around the communities that are actually at the table that are talking about it. I mentioned a little bit earlier some of the work that I've done with Habesha and the Urban Green Jobs Workforce Development Training Program. We work in communities that are being displaced, they're being gentrified, and the community members are not seen as viable or even human beings. Oftentimes, just the way in which they're treated and what they're having to live and go through, and to go into those communities and educate the folks, and then also learn from them. Right? There has to be an exchange. Oftentimes it's pretty transactional. I'm just going to go, I'm going to tell you about this, tell you what an awful situation you're in, but we are rarely giving the tools for the people that are living there to go through it, to realize what's going on, and then to actually make a change. And so once you do that through our programming, through Wawa's programming, through others' programming throughout the globe and the members of our network, what we've seen is you have incremental change, right? And that's not something to scoff at, because you're actually able to see the needle move, right? Where now you have community members testing their water. Now you have community members being more aware around what conservation means and what it also signals in their communities. What it looks like when you hear, I can't make it to the community meeting every single night, but because I have a network, hey, you can, or I'll watch your child, or let's work together a little bit more collaboratively so we can make sure that we're informed and we can go to these zoning meetings and we can hear what's actually going on. You have to be more civically involved. I used to think, we don't have to do that. We'll just roll up our sleeves and get to work. Well, yes, it's both and, and until you actually have all of the members in the community, it's going to be hard. It is going to be hard, but you can't let something being hard deter you from actually doing that work. And so what it means to me is hard work. What it means to me is there is hope. It means to me that we got a lot of work to do. And it's a beautiful burden at the same time, because this is work that's not impacting just me. It's not just impacting my daughter. It's impacting generations and generations and generations to come. We have one Earth and one planet, despite these new space suits that the U.S. Air Force has just rolled out, right? We're not leaving. I know I'm not leaving. And so I have to do the best that I can do, even within the system that's here, and also work to dismantle that apparatus so that we don't continue to perpetuate the challenges that are there. It's very much so institutionalized. So, yeah.
We need another hour, right? I have been really doing a lot of, I guess equity is everybody's journey, right? Everybody has their own journey. And I'm mixed race, so I see the world differently. I know that. Like, I think I belong at everybody's table, but that doesn't mean that the people at the table believe that I belong there. And so then I'll get that, so there's this weird disconnect with that, about having a seat. Like, I believe I have a seat. A lot of people don't believe I have a seat, and having that tension. So I empathize with it. I think that climate change is one of the greatest, I have to do this with my eyes closed so I'm clear on my thoughts, is the greatest challenge that humanity has ever faced. And it is asking of us something that we have never achieved, which is to reach across boundaries and races and experiences to understand each other and where we come from and how we solve the problem together. So on the one hand, this surfacing of where we're at with climate justice and environmental racism and the horrible things that are happening in my community and your community about pollution and redlining and towns in Louisiana that, just industrial petrochemicals are just flooding with horrible chemicals because they were never incorporated, because they were formerly communities who were run by former slaves, by freed slaves. Like, the things that you see in my town just are gut punches. But at the same time, I feel like there's a ripping apart of each other that is starting to simmer around. And I'm starting to worry, because we need each other across boundaries more than ever. And there is a really healthy conversation and knowledge and acknowledgement and solutions-oriented action. But at the same time, there's an uglier side to it too. And I'm just trying to be as thoughtful as I can be, because I see it and I hear things in almost every table in every room in the weirdest of ways. And I want us to be careful. But I will say this, that there is, even as an anthropologist, I spent years working with indigenous communities in Latin America and working with indigenous Native American communities. But it is stupid how long it has taken me to understand Native American anger around land and land rights and how it relates to climate change right now. Because if we don't understand what happened and acknowledge it actively in every conversation, I know what I'm hearing, then we're in trouble when it's us. Because climate change is going to displace all of us. I don't care who you are, where you come from, how many resources you have. Some people will be able to survive it better, but if we don't actually understand the dynamics of that, we are in trouble. We're going to be up for the biggest shock of our lives.
I want to say something, but I want you to go, because it's something that you said, and I want to respond to it, but I want you to go ahead.
I'm sitting here struggling with the loss over the historical context of people who have been historically through systems. This is about breaking down systems and being honest about what the systems have done and what they continue to do. And how these systems are being modified. You made a comment so that people will survive. No, they won't. They think they will, but they will not. Because sheer anarchy is going to take place. The further this gap gets of the haves versus the have-nots through this lens of climate change, it's going to be worse than you can even imagine.
I agree with everything you're saying. I agree with it. With Gini coefficient, the more inequity we have in a society, the more destable it is. And my response is yes and. When we look at history and climate and weather disruption, in every prehistoric society and how it reacts, one of the first reactions is xenophobia, tribalism. So, and fighting amongst each other for select resources. So how do we handle the power structures and all of that you said without deteriorating into factions against factions? That's my only concern. And it is
being honest about how we got here.
Yeah.
Glossing, like you said, it took you a while to understand the pain and the anger of the Native Americans.
No, it took me a while to understand how it relates to right now climate displacement. I understand pain, and we're all trying to understand pain, but in terms of trying to translate what you're hearing every day to everyday Americans. My job was a climate science reporter, I was a journalist, my job is translation. And I don't ever think I've heard it translated to the people who never thought it was relevant enough. Does that make sense? It was more me trying to figure out the solution.
Sense of relevancy was always denied the relevancy of those who were speaking about the injustice that they were suffering from. So if you look at the Native American, you look at the African American, we were subjected to environmental injustice from the chains being put on our bodies, being ripped away from the land and the spaces that we occupy with our own systems and structures that then get forced into this system here. It's from the Pilgrims to the Puritans, I was just reading this yesterday, the systems that govern what goes on in this country were started with the separation of one group to come over to another place because they couldn't do what they wanted to do there. So we'll go and create this false construct of race someplace else. And that's where we are.
Very true. We got our 5-minute mark. But yeah, that is where I was going. And I want to make sure that you have your last question, as well as just the piece around, as we go back and we look at what has happened and what's been done and what's been said time and time again by those whose voices have been muffled or silenced and snuffed out. You typically find that we've been saying it all along, and now it's being validated only because of who's saying it now. And so when we think about who's actually going to continue and the people that aren't going to be there, what has happened to the generations and generations of people who have suffered at those same hands and the same experiences, who end up serving as the canaries in the coal mine, if you will. So, yeah.
Thank you all for everything you're saying. I think these are all very dire and essential conversations that we all need to be having across cultures, across generations. But I think because we are all feeling the necessity of these matters, we all need to take the initiative to have these conversations within our communities. This is going to be a long-term crisis in a limited amount of time. But with the 2 minutes that we have left, I would like to open up time for one question within the audience. 5:30. It's wonderful. I would like to open up discussion within the audience. So if you have any questions, please, now is the time.
There was another microphone.
This is the one.
Oh,
This is the one.
There's no two.
There's not two.
first and second one.
So I will be walking around. If you guys have any questions, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Do we have 1 minute to talk about the lack of water?
We have 10 minutes, so you can ask.
That's all I want to put it out there as to your opinions on the lack of water that we do already have.
Zeena, can you repeat the question because it's being live?
Right. So the question is more of a broad statement. What are your guys' thoughts on the lack of water that we will face? This will be a crisis internationally, is what you're saying? Water is life. What are your thoughts on this?
Water is life. I mean, we look at the amount of potable, drinking water, and we look at the amount of waste that happens within this society compared to across the board. And as we look at more and more urbanization and more people moving into these urbanized areas, if we don't demand that the developers, because development is happening, that they don't do a better job and that the people are not educated interact with our resources that are finite. Right? Oftentimes people just feel like it's a renewable resource. It's not. We don't get any more water. It's a closed loop system. And every time we add something else to it, every time that we put a chemical that I traveled from here down to the coast with Jenny through iGel, and even within the clams, which, you know, we all know these things, but some don't. Within the clams, you can still find, you know, birth control medications and heart medications inside of those clams that have never been exposed to that. They're just in the water, not popping birth control pills, you know, and they're being exposed to it. And so not only is flooding a problem in all the impervious surfaces that we have that are being built and developed, but the way in which we interact and actually place a value on the resources that are here. I think that's the connection, that's the pain, that's that righteous enragement that Native and Indigenous people have because of that break in their culture and the value that we put on nature, the planet, and our interconnectedness. So it's definitely a problem. To answer your question, I feel as though it is. And we have to do a better job of the value that we place on it and how we actually utilize our natural resources.
Righteous enragement. I love that, actually. That's actually right on. I'll answer this question, but I want to come back. Hold on a second. So water is huge. I mean, it's the biggest. When you look at the research, I think there was some researchers who were looking at displacement in Pakistan and communities who had experienced both flooding and drought. In flooded communities, we're more likely to just rebuild. I live in one in New Orleans. In communities that have no water, it's displacement. And we're seeing massive displacement and warfare being fought and not called out as such, whether it's Syria, whether it is the Latin American immigration crisis from Central America, which again, back to my old roots, working in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, we're seeing climate change in Central America that is directly related to the numbers that we're getting crossing the borders. When you have children from 3 countries all walking alone across a border, that is not because of one's individual policy. That is an environmental push factor, and small-scale farming collapsing, and people not having enough water. So we're not calling it out as it is. It's already here, and we're kind of calling it by different names. Like, we're starting to xenophobize it, and it's tearing us apart. But the one thing that the anthropology that is at the heart of what I do, regardless of the labels of the years after, when the land changes, it changes us. That's it's that, and that goes way back. It's huge, and we are not paying attention to it. And I mean, even in New Orleans, we have lead in our water, and it is not climate related; it's stupid related. And it is enough of a factor that it makes me want to leave sometimes when my water is not clean and I'm not feeling safe enough to drink it because it comes from the Mississippi River and it's contaminated. But that contamination passes from the river down through communities that are joyfully righteously enraged for good reasons. And just going back to just the comment over here, to the righteously enraged, it is justified and appropriate, and it needs to be heard and not glossed over. And I have no desire to gloss things over. In fact, I will go down a rabbit hole for the longest time. Yeah, but it's in systems overall. And I'm saying this out in public for the first time. That there is a point where enragement is starting to tear us apart, and I don't know when we're going to have that conversation.
You have to honor and respect it, though. I think the piece that she was getting at was really because you haven't, you know how you'll have an injustice done, or you deal with AA meetings and they say, admittance is the first step, right? There hasn't been an admittance of the wrong that's been done. And it continues to happen time and time again. And that continues to drive in and pull at the scab that may have happened, or dig at the hole, or dig at the crevice, or dig at that pain point. And it just adds insult to injury time and time again. And then when you say, I've been telling you to stop sticking me, you keep sticking me, and you keep sticking me, and I'm still bleeding, and I've told you this, and you say, oh, you know what, somebody just stuck me. This is absolutely inappropriate. We have to stop it now. Well, didn't I tell you I was getting stuck this whole time? But it doesn't matter because I've said it because I have been, devalued as a human being. And I think that that's the biggest piece is to honor and at least to start from the point of you've had a xenophilic people for a long, long time. And that xenophilia has been met with xenophobia time and time again. And now it's just, I'm not going to take it anymore. And I actually need you to honor and respect what I'm saying and what I'm doing. And so it's not directed to you as an individual. I just wanted to add a little clarity on why there's a level of righteous enragement. If you honor and you truly have that as at your core of, this is how I've been living. This tree is actually a part of my family. Because when I'm buried, I'm not buried in a casket. I'm actually giving back to the earth through my death. My skin becomes the earth and it becomes the tree and it becomes my ancestors. And that's when you see that being a part of that worldview. And so to disrespect it, to spit on the cultures, now they're crying or we've been crying and saying, this is foul. This is foul. This is foul. Well, it's not foul for me because this is my modus operandi. This is how I move until it actually affects me and my ability to live is affected. Only then will I have change. And that's where I feel as though we are. That's where we're in. And it hasn't been respected. And now that we're returning to a lot of the cultures that have been decimated and reviving those things and not calling it what it is and not honoring that is also another insult to injury. At least that's just from my perspective. I know I've gone off on that.
Just in terms of, can I make a suggestion? We have to be out of this room in about 5 minutes, but then we have a reception.
Okay.
So what I would love to do is, if we can, open this up to 1 or 2 more questions, probably from students, if there's students here who have questions, and then all of you can take it outside.
Thank you.
Hey, to kind of bring this back to the university level, I guess in my experience at this school, most of the people that I talk to, when I ask them why they're attaining knowledge, why they're going through the arduous, whatever, degrees that they're doing, usually just want to get a good job, want to make money. So I guess my question to you two is how can the student body and the university system, not just here, but everywhere, promote more ethical and environmental consciousness amongst people who just want to get a good job and make money?
We're a technological institute that doesn't have 2 working mics.
I think that being on a campus is one of the most powerful spaces you can be because you're connecting to people your age and kind of are setting the parameters for a whole new generation approach to the world. And the whole paradigm of making money is this is you make money by solving problems, right? This is the problem to solve. So organizing amongst yourselves to see how your generation wants to handle it and then talking to the other generations is key. That's actually a good way to have a job. And I don't... Okay.
Yep. I'll just say benefit corporations, benefit corporations, benefit corporations. Just when you find that match of your passion and your purpose, the money will come. And if it doesn't come, you keep going because your value isn't placed just on the dollar. I'm not telling you to go out and become homeless and not utilize your degree. I am telling you, though, to find what brings you joy and live in that purpose. And when you do that with all of your heart, it will come. It'll come.
I also would just like to throw in there, I think it's really important for youth to hold their universities accountable to divest from corporations that invest their money into these large fossil fuel companies. So that's what you can do to save your coin later on. Any more questions?
From student or non-student? Okay, well with that, I invite you all to join us for some semi-sustainable food. Gertrude's getting there. And thanks to Zeena and Raina and Julia for a really intriguing discussion.
Awesome, so you guys can all head out into the reception area now.